The recycled air hung heavy and metallic in Dr. Ares Thorne's cramped lab aboard the generation ship Hope. 47 years. 47 years since the launch, a desperate gamble that had flung humanity into the inky black, a fragile ark carrying the seed of civilization across the unfathomable gulf of interstellar space. Outside, the muted hum of the ship's life support systems was the constant, low thrum of their precarious existence, a lullaby of survival. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, skeletal shadows across Ares's weary face, highlighting the deep lines etched by years of relentless work and the gnawing anxiety that had become his constant companion. He stared at the datapad, its screen displaying a chaotic mess of fragmented data, a garbled distress signal, weak and fading. It originated from Kepler's 186F, a colony established decades ago on the very edge of explored space, a world humanity had fought tooth and nail to claim. The signal was wrong. Terribly wrong. A sharp, metallic tang of fear tightened in Ares's chest. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, a cold dread that was as familiar as the recycled air. It wasn't the technical glitches that worried him, he'd seen those before. It was the silence woven into the static, the absence of coherent pleas for help. It screamed of something far more sinister. A sigh, ragged and weary, escaped his lips. He rubbed his eyes, his gaze falling on a faded photograph tucked into a corner of his datapad, a smiling young woman with bright eyes and a cascade of auburn hair, his late wife, Ilara. The guilt pricked at him, sharp and insistent, a constant reminder of the life she'd sacrificed so he could pursue his research, this desperate search for a future that might never come. A sudden tap on the door startled him. Dr. Lena Petrova, his second-in-command, stood in the doorway, her usually vibrant face drawn and pale. Her dark eyes, normally sparkling with sharp intelligence, were clouded with an apprehension that mirrored his own. Another one, Ares? Her voice was a hushed whisper, barely audible above the ship's steady hum. Ares nodded, his throat tight. Kepler's 186F. The signal, it's fragmented. Distorted. They're not responding to standard protocols. Lena frowned, her brow furrowing in worry. This is becoming more frequent, Ares. These anomalies. She gestured towards the main view screen, a vast, inky canvas punctuated only by the distant gleam of the dying neutron star that served as their celestial anchor, their only beacon in the absolute void. What if it's not anomalies at all? A shiver ran down Ares's spine. He knew what she meant. The unspoken fear that clung to the crew like a shroud. The fear of the unknown, the fear that something else was out there, something far more terrifying than the challenges they'd already faced. I'm going to run another analysis, Ares said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. He needed to maintain control, for his sake and for the sake of the hundreds of lives that depended on him. Maybe we can find a pattern. But deep down, a cold knot of certainty settled in his gut. This wasn't just another anomaly. This was something bigger. Something far more devastating than they could possibly imagine. The enhanced analysis took hours, a grueling process of sifting through the fragmented distress signal from Kepler's 186F. Ares worked alongside Lena, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of the datapads, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic clicking of keys and the occasional frustrated sigh. The air in the lab grew thick with tension, a palpable anxiety hanging in the space between them. The initial sense of unease had morphed into something far more concrete, a chilling certainty that had settled over them like a shroud. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a pattern emerged from the digital chaos. It wasn't a pattern of human distress, but something far more alien, far more terrifying. A series of rhythmic pulses, like a heartbeat, but infinitely more complex, interwoven with strange energy signatures that defied anything Ares had ever encountered. He stared at the waveforms, his breath catching in his throat. They weren't just signals, they were a symphony of destruction, a chilling, almost musical prelude to annihilation. What is it? Lena asked, her voice barely a breath, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that matched his own. Ares swallowed, his voice thick with dread. It's not human, Lena. It's something else. Something consuming. He brought up a series of visual reconstructions based on the energy signatures. The images were fragmented, blurry, yet terrifyingly clear. They showed vast, amorphous shapes, black as the void itself, engulfing planets, leaving behind nothing but desolate wastelands. The shapes seemed to shift and writhe, a nightmarish dance of destruction. They were like a swarm of biomechanical entities, moving with a terrifying synergy, consuming everything in their path. "It's organic," Lena whispered, her face pale, but advanced. "Beyond anything we've ever seen." Ares nodded grimly. "The Obsidian Tide," he murmured, the name a chilling echo of the whispered rumors that had circulated for years on the fringes of the scientific community, rumors dismissed as fringe theories. Now, those rumors had become terrifying reality. The Obsidian Tide was real, and it was at their doorstep. A wave of nausea washed over Lena. "This isn't just a colony attack, Ares. This is galactic." Ares felt the cold grip of despair constricting his chest. The sheer scale of the threat, the utter annihilation of worlds, was overwhelming. Kepler's 186F wasn't just destroyed, it was consumed. There was no hope of rescue, no trace of survivors. The Obsidian Tide hadn't just attacked, it had eradicated. The gravity of their situation crashed down on them, the weight of it nearly unbearable. This wasn't a simple rescue mission. This was a fight for survival, not just for the Hope, but for the entire human race. And based on the evidence before them, they were fighting a losing battle. A profound silence descended upon the lab, heavier and more oppressive than the recycled air, broken only by the silent, relentless ticking of the clock, each second a nail hammered into the coffin of their hopes. The symphony of destruction had begun, and humanity was playing a desperate, discordant counterpoint. The news of the Obsidian Tide's advance spread through the Hope like wildfire, igniting a maelstrom of fear and desperate debate. Ares found himself at the center of a raging storm, caught between the grim reality of the situation and the conflicting opinions of the crew. The ship's bridge, usually a scene of calm efficiency, was now a chaotic mix of hushed whispers, frantic discussions, and strained faces. Admiral Hayes, a grizzled veteran with a steely gaze and an even steelier resolve, dominated the central console. His voice, usually calm and authoritative, was edged with a barely contained fury. "We launch a counter-offensive. We hit them hard, before they reach us." Ares felt a cold dread wash over him. Hayes' plan was a suicidal gamble. Their weaponry, designed for planetary defense and resource extraction, was hopelessly outmatched by the Obsidian Tide's terrifying power. A direct confrontation would mean certain annihilation. "Admiral," Ares said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the cacophony, "with all due respect, a direct attack is suicide. We don't understand their technology, their biology. We need to know how they operate, where their weaknesses lie." Hayes turned, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Weaknesses? Thorn, we're talking about the end of the human race. We don't have time for scientific curiosity." "But Admiral," Lena Petrova interjected, her voice steady, "Dr. Thorn's right. A blind attack is useless. We need to understand the enemy before we can hope to defeat it. We need to learn their biology, find an exploitable weakness." A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the low hum of the ship's engines. The tension was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket of fear and uncertainty. Ares could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, the burden of their hope and their fear. "We study their biology," Ares stated, his voice resonating with a conviction that surprised even himself. "We find a chink in their armor. That's our only hope." A murmur of dissent rippled through the assembled officers. Many were hardened soldiers, accustomed to direct action, unwilling to accept the idea of a protracted study while the Obsidian Tide advanced inexorably. "We'll need a team," Ares continued, ignoring the murmurs, his gaze firm. "A daring expedition to a partially destroyed planet on the edge of the tide's advance. We need samples, data, anything that will help us understand the enemy." Hayes stared at him, his expression unreadable for a long moment. The weight of the decision, the life-or-death gamble, hung heavy in the air. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire human race, he nodded. "Very well, Thorn. But I'm holding you personally responsible if this fails. We have one chance, and one chance only. The room buzzed with a mix of nervous energy and grim determination. Ares felt a jolt of icy dread, but beneath it, a spark of defiance ignited. He'd taken on impossible odds before. He would do it again. The survival of humanity rested on the gamble he was about to make. And he had a feeling it was going to be far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The Stardust, a small, heavily armored exploration vessel, detached from the Hope, a tiny speck venturing into the maw of the beast. Ares, Lena, and a small, hand-picked team of scientists and engineers were aboard, their faces grim, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The journey to the target planet, a ravaged world on the very edge of the Obsidian Tide's advance, was fraught with tension. Each moment brought them closer to the unknown, closer to the terrifying entity that threatened to extinguish humanity. The planet loomed before them, a scarred and desolate wasteland. Once vibrant ecosystems were now barren, blackened husks, the evidence of the Obsidian Tide's passage stark and undeniable. The air, analyzed by the Stardust sensors, was thin and toxic, the surface littered with the twisted remnants of once grand structures, twisted and broken like children's toys carelessly discarded by a giant. "Prepare for landing," Lena's voice, tight with apprehension, crackled through the comms. "We're going in." The landing was rough, the Stardust bouncing hard against the uneven terrain. Once the dust settled, the team suited up, their movements stiff and deliberate within the bulky protective gear. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss of their oxygen tanks and the occasional metallic scrape of their boots against the alien soil. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a silence heavy with the shadow of death. "Remember the protocols," Ares's voice was muffled by his helmet, yet firm. "Minimum contact. Prioritize sample collection." Even he found his own voice slightly shaky. He was a scientist, not a soldier, yet here they were, venturing into a war zone, hoping to gather evidence of a foe that dwarfed human understanding. Their progress was slow, arduous. Every shadow seemed to write with potential danger, every rustle of the wind sent shivers down their spines. They encountered bizarre, twisted plant life, remnants of the planet's ecosystem, mutated and corrupted by the Obsidian Tide's influence. The landscape itself was a living testament to the horrors they faced. Suddenly, a low growl resonated through the ground, a sound that vibrated in their bones. A tendril of the Obsidian Tide, a dark, writhing mass of biomechanical horror, erupted from the ground, its surface gleaming with an oily sheen. It lashed out with terrifying speed, missing Lena by a hair's breadth. "Contact!" a panicked shout echoed through their comms. Chaos erupted. Laser fire blazed, the Stardust's weaponry spitting destructive energy at the grotesque entity. But the Obsidian Tide seemed impervious, absorbing the blasts with alarming ease. Its movements were fluid, unpredictable, its very nature a horrifying defiance of known physics. Amid the chaos, Ares managed to collect several samples of the Tide's material, a dark, oily substance that pulsed faintly with bioelectric energy. They retreated to the Stardust, barely escaping with their lives. The samples would be their hope, the key to understanding the enemy, the potential weapon that would allow humanity to fight back. They had taken a step into the heart of darkness, and survived to tell the tale, but the journey was far from over. The Obsidian Tide was waiting. Back aboard the Hope, the atmosphere crackled with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilarated anticipation. The samples collected from the ravaged planet were carefully secured in the ship's high-security lab, Ares and his team working tirelessly to analyze the strange, oily substance retrieved from the Obsidian Tide. The substance pulsed faintly with a bioelectric energy, its structure unlike anything they had encountered before. It was a terrifying blend of organic and inorganic material, defying simple classification. Days bled into nights, the scientists working around the clock, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate hope. The pressure was immense, the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. The initial fear and despair were gradually replaced by a grim determination, a focus that bordered on obsession. Then, a breakthrough. A subtle anomaly in the Tide's energy signature, a rhythmic fluctuation almost imperceptible amidst the chaotic energy flow. Lena, ever vigilant, had noticed it first. Ares, she said, her voice low, barely a whisper, look at this fluctuation. It's rhythmic. Almost like a heartbeat. Ares stared at the data, his breath catching in his throat. He ran multiple simulations, cross-referencing the energy signature with the tide's physical structure. The implications hit him with the force of a physical blow. The rhythmic pulse wasn't just random energy, it was a biological marker, a vital sign of the obsidian tide itself. It's synchronized, he murmured, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and dawning realization. The entire tide, billions of individual entities, are synchronized to a single, central rhythm. The discovery sent a wave of excitement rippling through the lab, but it was a carefully managed excitement, tempered by the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a scientific curiosity, it was a potential weapon. If they could disrupt that central rhythm, if they could somehow break the synchronization, they might have a way to weaken, or even defeat, the obsidian tide. But how? Lena asked, her voice filled with a cautious optimism. How do we disrupt it? How do we target something so vast, so alien? Ares leaned back, his gaze fixed on the data, his mind already racing ahead. The answer wasn't obvious, but it was there, hidden within the chaotic beauty of the energy patterns. The rhythmic pulse was intricately interwoven with the planet's electromagnetic field, a feedback loop of destruction. It was a vulnerability. We use their own rhythm against them, Ares stated, his voice filled with a newfound confidence. We create a counterpulse, a disruptive frequency. Something that will overwhelm their synchronization, throw them off balance, and maybe break them apart. The challenge was immense. Creating a counterpulse powerful enough to affect such a vast entity would require a tremendous amount of energy, a massive undertaking that pushed the Hope's capabilities to their absolute limit. But for the first time since the discovery of the obsidian tide, a flicker of real hope ignited. They might have found a way to fight back, a way to turn the tide of the impending doom. The fight for humanity's survival had shifted from a desperate struggle for mere survival to a race against time, a daring gamble on the edge of extinction. The creation of the counterpulse weapon became a desperate race against time, a frantic symphony of scientific ingenuity and engineering prowess. Every available resource on the Hope was diverted to the project, the ship's vast energy reserves being channeled into the construction of a massive, experimental device. Ares, Lena, and their team worked tirelessly, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate hope that bordered on obsession. The air in the labs thrummed with a frenetic energy, a tangible sense of urgency that permeated every corner of the ship. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane, to create a concentrated beam of disruptive energy, precisely tuned to the obsidian tide central rhythm, and project it across interstellar distances. The power requirements were astronomical, pushing the Hope systems to their absolute limits. The risk of overloading the ship was immense, a potential catastrophe that could wipe out humanity's last bastion of hope. "Are you sure about this, Ares?" Lena asked, her voice tight with concern, as she oversaw the final calibrations. Doubt, a rare visitor to her usually steely resolve, flickered in her eyes. The sheer scale of the undertaking was daunting, the potential for catastrophic failure terrifyingly real. Ares, his face etched with fatigue but his eyes burning with unwavering resolve, met her gaze. "We have no other choice, Lena. This is our only shot. We either win, or we all die." The tension in the control room was almost unbearable. Every whirring component, every flashing light, seemed to amplify the mounting pressure. Admiral Hayes, his face grim but resolute, stood beside Ares, his silence speaking volumes. He had initially been skeptical of Ares's plan, preferring the blunt force of direct confrontation, but he had come to accept the grim necessity of their audacious gamble. The moment of truth arrived. The counterpulse device hummed, its massive core radiating an intense energy. Ares held his breath, his finger hovering over the activation button, the weight of humanity's fate pressing down on him. This was it, the culmination of years of research, of countless sleepless nights, of a desperate hope clinging to survival. With a deep breath, he pressed the button. A blinding flash of light erupted from the device, a concentrated beam of energy piercing the void, reaching out towards the encroaching obsidian tide. The ship shuddered violently under the immense power surge, alarms blared, and the air throbbed with the energy of the counterpulse. They held their breaths, clinging to hope as the beam shot across the void, a desperate prayer sent into the heart of the darkness. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the fate of humanity hanging in the precarious balance, suspended between hope and utter annihilation. The aftermath of the counterpulse was a maelstrom of sensory overload. The hope shuddered violently, systems overloading, alarms screaming. The air crackled with residual energy, and the very fabric of the ship seemed to vibrate under the strain. Ares, Lena, and the rest of the team huddled together, bracing themselves against the violent tremors, their faces a mask of grim determination. They had unleashed a weapon of unimaginable power, and now they waited, breathless, for the result. Moments stretched into an eternity. The initial cacophony slowly subsided, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the ship's strained groans and the rhythmic beep of failing systems. The tension was almost unbearable, a suffocating weight pressing down on them. Hope battled despair in their hearts, a fierce struggle played out in the silent intensity of their faces. Then, through the static, a faint signal. A faint, but unmistakable shift in the obsidian tide's energy signature. The rhythmic pulse, once so strong, so terrifyingly consistent, was faltering, breaking down. The chaotic symphony of destruction was becoming discordant, unraveling. "It's working!" Lena shouted, her voice hoarse with emotion, a mix of disbelief and ecstatic relief. She pointed to the main view screen. The images from the distant edge of the system, previously obscured by the chaotic energy signatures of the obsidian tide, were slowly clearing. The dark, amorphous shapes were breaking apart, their movements becoming disjointed, their terrifying synergy dissolving. Admiral Hayes, who had stood silently beside Ares throughout the ordeal, let out a long, shaky breath. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a stark contrast to the grim determination that had characterized his face. He clapped Ares on the shoulder, the gesture surprisingly gentle. "You did it, Thorn. You actually did it." The initial relief was soon replaced by cautious optimism, a tentative hope tempered by the grim reality of the situation. The obsidian tide wasn't destroyed, not yet. But its advance had been halted, its terrifying power broken. Humanity had turned the tide, if only for now. The battle was far from over. The obsidian tide was a powerful, resilient entity, and its disintegration was likely to be a protracted process. The threat was not eradicated, but it was weakened, its inexorable advance disrupted. Humanity had bought itself time, a precious commodity in this desperate struggle for survival. They had defied impossible odds, proven their resilience, and shown their indomitable spirit. They had fought back, and they had won, at least for now. The silence that followed was not one of despair, but of exhausted triumph, the fragile silence of a victory hard won.